Wyoming Territory, 1878, the day they told Willa Carrigan to leave town. The wind never stopped blowing. It howled across the dry plains outside Laramie, kicked up dust that stung her eyes and stole the words right out of her mouth. But maybe that was for the best. There was nothing left to say to the people who had once called her family. She stood on the church steps, dress torn at the hem, a satchel clutched tight in her hand. Pastor Miller's voice had been quiet but firm. "You chose a man with blood on his hands, Willa. You brought shame to your father's name. You are no longer welcome here." They did not care that the man she loved had been hunted for a crime he did not commit. They did not care that he died defending her. All they saw was sin, guilt by association, so she walked. Past the general store, where Mrs. Penham turned her face. Past the schoolhouse, where the children had once laughed and tugged at her skirts. Past her father's grave with the flowers she had placed 2 days earlier, now trampled under someone's boot. She walked until her feet bled and her breath burned. She did not look back. 3 days later, she reached the edge of Medicine Bow Forest, where the land turned wild and the silence was thick. Her food was gone. Her water was half a canteen. Her boots were ruined. And when she finally gave in and dropped to the ground, she did not cry. Not until she heard a voice behind her. "You lost, miss." She turned slowly, ready to defend herself, but the man standing behind her was not like the others she had met on the trail. He wore a wide-brimmed hat shadowing sharp blue eyes and had a rifle slung across his back, but his stance was relaxed, his tone easy. "I ain't lost," she said. "I am exactly where I am meant to be." He studied her for a moment, then stepped forward and offered her a hand. "Name's Yates Varnell. Got a small cabin upriver. You need rest. You can come." Willa hesitated. Her pride had carried her this far, but her legs gave out when she tried to stand again, and Yates caught her before she hit the dirt. He did not say anything else. He just lifted her into his arms like she weighed nothing and carried her through the trees. His cabin was rough-hewn and small, but warm. He set her on the cot in the corner, started a fire, and handed her water without asking questions. She drank it all. "Why are you out here alone?" Willa asked once her voice returned. "I prefer quiet," Yates said, sitting across from her, elbows on his knees. "People talk too much, lie too much." She watched him. There was no judgment in his eyes, just calm, steady, like he had seen worse and survived it. "You going to ask why I am out here?" she asked. "No," he said. "But if you want to tell me, I will listen." Willa did not speak, not then, but when the sun went down and Yates laid a blanket beside the fire for himself, she found her voice. "I loved someone," she said into the dark. "He was not perfect, but he was good to me, and now he is gone, and they blame me for loving him." Silence followed. Then Yates said, "That is not something a person should be punished for." She turned her head and looked at him. He was not looking at her, just staring into the flames. The quiet between them stretched out, but it was not heavy, not like in Laramie. It was peaceful. The next morning, Willa woke to the smell of rabbit stew and bread. Her stomach growled so loud it made her flush. Yates handed her a tin plate. "Eat all of it. You are too thin." She did. Over the next few days, she helped tend the fire, swept the floor, and mended a tear in his shirt. He showed her how to check traps and carry water from the creek. They fell into a rhythm. One evening, she sat on the porch while he sharpened his knife beside her. "You always live alone?" she asked. "Since I was 17, he said. "Father died in Kansas. Mother followed him soon after. I came west. You never married?" Yates looked at her then. "I never found someone I wanted to wake up beside every day." She held his gaze. "Not even once?" "Not until now." Willa's breath caught. He said it like it was just a fact, no flourish, no seduction, just the truth. She looked away, heart racing. Days turned to weeks. Willa found herself smiling again, laughing even. Yates did not press her to speak of the past, but she told him anyway. About the man she loved, about the town that turned on her, about the shame she carried. He never pitied her, never looked at her like she was broken. One night, a storm rolled in fast. Thunder cracked over the trees. Willa flinched as lightning lit up the cabin. She stood in the center of the room, arms wrapped around herself. Yates crossed the space and stopped in front of her. "I will never let anything hurt you," he said. She looked up at him, chest tightening. "You do not have to say that," she whispered. I know, he said, but I mean it. She reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. I have never felt safe, she said. Not really, not until you. His thumb brushed over her knuckles. You are the only one I will ever love, Willa, she blinked, stunned. I know it is fast, he added, but I do not care, you are it, for me. Tears filled her eyes. She stepped forward and pressed her forehead to his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight while the storm raged outside. For the first time in her life, Willa did not want to run. She had found where she belonged. Snow came early that year. By the time October settled over the mountains, the trees had shed their gold and the mornings turned to frost. Willa woke each day tucked under a quilt stitched with uneven squares, a patch of blue calico brushing her chin, the scent of pine smoke lingering in the rafters. Yates had added a second layer of logs to the cabin walls to keep out the cold, and the roof no longer leaked when the sleet came down hard. She'd taken to feeding the hens that wandered freely behind the cabin 3 scrawny birds Yates had traded for salt and dried apples with a trapper down from the Bighorns. They laid barely enough eggs to stretch across a week, but Willa gathered them like treasure. One morning she returned from the coop with an egg cradled in each hand and found Yates standing by the table with a rolled canvas map, brow furrowed. You planning on going somewhere? She asked, setting the eggs down gently. He didn't look up right away. There's a trader comes through Elk Ridge before the snows cut it off. I was thinking of riding out tomorrow, only a day's ride, be back the next. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. What do we need? Nothing urgent, he said, but I've been meaning to get you some proper boots. Ones that fit, and sugar maybe. You've been talking about pie in your sleep. Willa blinked. I have not. You have, he said, finally grinning. Cherry 2 nights ago. She tried to hide her smile but failed. I haven't had pie since before the spring turned. Yates folded the map and slipped it back into the drawer. Then it's time. He left it first light, rifle slung over his shoulder, a sack of furs strapped behind his saddle. Willa watched from the porch, arms wrapped around herself. The air was sharp, the ground brittle underfoot. Be careful, she said. I always am, he replied. I'll be back before you miss me. But she missed him before he reached the trees. That night she brought in extra wood and bolted the door with the iron latch he'd forged last summer. The wind moaned through the trees, but the fire crackled strong and the kettle steamed. She sat by the hearth with a scrap of wool in her lap, trying to stitch a lining into her mittens. Halfway through the second seam, something shifted beyond the window. She froze, listened. A branch creaked and then nothing. She moved to the window, heart pounding. The moon had risen pale and full above the tree line, casting long shadows. She pressed a hand to the glass but saw nothing out of place. Still, she didn't sleep much. She waited for dawn with her Colt revolver laid across her lap. By midday, Yates returned as promised, the horse trotting slow but steady up the hill. His coat was dusted with snow and his beard carried flecks of frost, but he was smiling. In the saddlebags, he brought a bolt of red flannel, a tin of molasses, and a pair of boots that were just her size. They're plain, he said as she unlaced them, but they'll hold through winter. She sat beside the fire, tugging them on. Her toes didn't pinch. The leather was stiff but good. You went all that way just to bring me boots. He knelt beside her, brushing snow off his sleeves. I went all that way because you're here. That makes it worth it. She reached out, touching his cheek with the back of her fingers. I don't know what I did to deserve this. He caught her hand in his. You survived. That's enough. Later that night, he made a stew with dried onions and the last of the smoked venison. She stirred in wild sage while he sliced bread. I saw someone, he said quietly, not looking up. On the ridge above the split trail, didn't get close enough to make out a face. She stilled. Did they see you? Maybe they didn't follow. Could have been a trapper. Could have been someone else. Willa set the spoon down. You think someone came looking for me? I don't know, he said. But I'll keep watch tonight, just in case. I can help, he shook his head. You've done enough, let me carry this part. That night they sat outside beneath a sky so clear the stars looked close enough to touch. Yates leaned against the porch post, rifle across his lap. Willa sat with her back to the door, blanket around her shoulders. You're not afraid, he said after a while. I used to be, she replied, but fear stopped serving me, he nodded slowly. You ever think about starting over somewhere farther off? She looked at him. I already did. He turned then, really turned and met her eyes. You'd stay, even if things got hard. They already have, she said, and I'm still here. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. Then I'll build us a life worth staying for. She closed her eyes. You already have. The first snow held late into November, clinging in drifts along the north-facing slopes and softening the sound of every step. Willa knelt beside the creek, her breath clouding in the cold as she rinsed a bundle of wintergreen she'd pulled from beneath the pines. The water stung her hands, but she welcomed the ache. It reminded her she was still here, still choosing this life every morning she woke beside Yates. When she returned to the cabin, she found him splitting kindling near the lean-to, sleeves rolled high on his forearms. His shirt was damp at the collar, and the rhythm of his axe struck clean through the stillness. She stood watching until he rested the blade and looked up. Something wrong? He asked, brushing his hands against his trousers. She shook her head. I was thinking we might build a drying rack. For herbs and roots, I can hang it inside by the stove. He nodded once. We've got pine strips left from the table legs. I'll shape the frame tonight. Willa stepped closer, then hesitated. You said you saw someone near Elk Ridge. I remember. Did you notice anything else about them? Height, how they moved. He leaned back against the shed wall, arms folded. Taller than me. Stayed near the timberline, which means they didn't want to leave tracks in open snow. Rode a dark horse, something hardy. Could be someone tracking game. Could be someone tracking something else. She let out a breath. I keep thinking about the way they looked at us back in Laramie, like I was something rotten. Yates studied her face. You're not afraid of them finding you. You're afraid they'll never stop trying. She nodded once, jaw set. He stepped forward and wrapped his coat around her shoulders, his voice steady. Let them come. They won't take anything from you again. That night, with the wind easing against the shutters and the fire burning low, Willa stood at the window, watching the moon rise through a break in the clouds. Yates sat nearby, shaping the drying rack with careful strokes of his knife. The silence between them was gentle. You ever miss Kansas? She asked without turning. I miss my mother's biscuits, he said after a moment, and the sound of frogs after a rain. But that place buried most of what I loved before I could learn to hold on to it. She came to sit beside him on the floor. I used to think if I just did everything right, they'd always love me. That being good was enough. Yates didn't look up from the wood. You were good. They just weren't. She watched the way his hands worked, slow and deliberate. When I left, I thought I'd forgotten how to trust anyone. He handed her a whittled slat, edges smooth. Then you remembered. She turned the wood in her fingers, then leaned into him, resting her head against his arm. I don't want to keep looking over my shoulder. You won't have to, he said. The next morning, they found tracks near the ridge above the eastern trail, deep hoofprints, more than one set. Yates knelt beside them, gloved fingers brushing the snow. 2 riders, he said, moving slow. Not just passing through. Willa crouched beside him. We should be ready. He stood, face unreadable. We're leaving after supper, taking the North Pass. I know a place. She didn't ask where. She just nodded and went to pack. Before dusk, they loaded the mules with sacks of grain, dried meat, and the herbs she'd saved. Yates wrapped the rifle in oilskin, then helped her into her coat. Will it be far? She asked. 3 days if the weather holds. I built a cabin there once, years ago. Never thought I'd use it again. She met his eyes. But you kept it. I always hoped I'd have someone to bring there, someone who'd make it more than a shelter. They rode out under a sky bruised with twilight, the forest quiet around them. The cold bit through her coat, but Yates kept close, his presence steady beside her. By the time they made camp near the river bend, the stars had scattered across the heavens like frost on glass. Willa lay beside the fire, her head on his shoulder, the scent of smoke in her hair. I never thought I'd have another place, she whispered, not one that was mine. Yates turned toward her, pressing a kiss to her temple. This one is ours. She closed her eyes and let the warmth of him anchor her, the world outside their fire forgotten. For the first time since she'd been cast out, she wasn't running. She was going home. The cabin sat in a narrow valley walled by granite bluffs and thick pine. Wind didn't move much down there, and the snow, when it fell, settled quiet and deep. Yates pushed the door open with a shoulder, then stepped back to let Willa through. Dust and dry leaves lined the corners, but the hearth stood solid, and the roof still held. She ran her fingers along the log walls, not speaking. By the second day, they'd swept it clean, patched the shutter hinges, and hung a wool blanket over the doorway to keep the cold out. A lean-to off the back held a broken-handled hoe and a rusted scythe. Yates eyed them both and said nothing, just brought in the kindling they'd stacked under the eaves. Late that evening, as the fire settled low and their supper cooled in the pot, Willa pulled a small carved bird from her satchel. Its wings were worn smooth, the beak chipped. "I started carving this when I was 10, she said, holding it up so the firelight caught the grain. My mother caught me with a knife I'd taken from her mending basket. She thought I'd slice my fingers. I did too." Yates leaned back against the wall, eyes on her hands. "You finish it back then?" "No, I buried it under the porch when she took the knife, dug it up again after she died." He didn't ask why she'd kept it. He just said, "It's good work." "You ought to finish it now." "I think I will." The next morning, they walked the ridge above the creek to check for signs of the riders. Snow had softened their trail, but no fresh prints crossed the path. Still, Yates marked a line of tree bark with his knife, just to be sure. On the way back down, Willa asked, "Did you ever think about joining a town again? Taking land closer to people?" Yates didn't answer right away. They stopped beside a stand of spruce, the air heavy with silence. "I tried once," he said. "Cheyenne, 4 years back. Bought a lot near the edge of the stockyards, built a fence, planted corn. First week, a man came by asking if I'd seen anyone matching a description. He looked like law, but he didn't say. I told him no. The next evening, someone burned the fence." She looked toward him, frowning. "What did you do?" "Sold the lot, rode west, didn't look back." They walked in silence a while longer before Willa said, "Folks think the worst of you. It doesn't matter what you've done." "No," he said. "But it matters what you do next." That night, she started carving the bird again, smoothing its back with the tip of her blade. Yates repaired a trap trigger near the fire, pausing now and then to glance at her hands. "I want to plant something come spring," she said, not looking up. "Even if it's just onions and beans, I want to watch something grow again." He nodded. "We'll clear the ground near the creek. I'll build a fence that holds." She smiled just a little. "You think this place can hold a life?" His voice was quiet. "I think it already does." On the fourth morning, they found a broken horseshoe near the lower trail, worn smooth, one nail still clinging. Yates crouched beside it, turning it in his palm. "Means they passed through fast," he said. "Rider likely didn't stop. Could be they were never looking for us," she said. "Could be," he answered, slipping the shoe into his coat. "But we'll stay ready." She nodded, then looked toward the creek. "I want to build a bench near the water, where I can sit and listen." "Then we'll cut the wood tomorrow," he said, and they did. Each day after, the world grew quieter, snow deepened in the hollows. Deer crossed the empty meadow below, and a red fox began leaving tracks near the shed. Willa carved a second bird, smaller than the first, its beak still rough, but its wings stretched wide. She set it on the sill above the door. One night, she stood outside just before dusk, watching the sky shift from gold to ash. Yates came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers without a word. "I never believed I'd be allowed peace," she said, voice low. He studied her face, the way the wind caught wisps of her hair. "You didn't need permission, Willa." She looked over at him. "You gave me something better than that." He nodded, thumb brushing over the back of her knuckles. "A place. And someone to share it." She leaned into him, heart steady. "I love you." It wasn't sudden, it wasn't loud, but it was the truth. He turned and kissed her forehead, then her mouth, slow and certain. "I've been yours since the first day you didn't flinch," he said. And beneath the early stars, with the cold folding around them and the mountains standing guard, Willa knew she'd found what the world had once told her she couldn't have: a home. A man who saw her, and a love that no one could take. By early March, the thaw had begun in the valley. It came slow, just enough to loosen the ice at the edge of the creek and send rivulets running under the snowpack. The cabin stayed cool through the mornings, but the bite had left the air. Willa woke to the sound of water dripping from the eaves. and the scent of damp earth climbing up through the timber floor. Yates had risen early, gone to check the line of snares he'd reset the day before. She found him returning up the trail just as the sun crested the ridge, a hair hanging from his belt and his coat open at the throat. "I saw a pair of geese overhead," he said, handing her the catch. "They're flying low again." She took it, fingers brushing his. "Think it'll flood down below? If the melt comes too fast, maybe. But the valley's high enough, we'll be all right." She cleaned the hair while he stacked more wood near the shed. Later, she salted the hide and laid it out flat on the back rail, pinning the corners with stones. She'd taken to keeping the useful scraps not just for practical things, but because it meant something to her to waste nothing now. Everything they built, everything they kept, carried weight. That afternoon, Yates cleared brush near the southern edge of the clearing while Willa turned the soil behind the cabin. When she struck a patch of rock, she paused to rest, brushing a sleeve across her brow. "Could terrace that slope," Yates said, nodding toward the incline. "Lay stone, reroute the water, might be good for squash." "We'd need extra hands for that," she said, half teasing. "I could ride to Elk Ridge once the trail clears, ask after someone trustworthy." She set the spade aside. "Would you be willing to bring back letters?" "From town?" He leaned on the rake in his hands. "You got someone still writing?" "My sister. She lives near Ogallala now. She sent one by a freight driver before the freeze. I never answered." He didn't press her, just said, "I'll ask at the post." "If she sent something, it'll be waiting." She nodded, a quiet gratitude in her chest that didn't need naming. That night, as they sat near the hearth, Willa unfolded a piece of canvas she'd stitched the week before. On it, she'd drawn rough outlines of the valley, the creek bend, the stand of pines, the slope they would terrace. Yates leaned over her shoulder, studying it. "You've got a good eye," he said. "I just want to see it before it grows." "You will," she turned to him. "You ever think you'd want children here?" Yates didn't answer right away. He reached for a piece of kindling, turning it in his hands. "I used to think I'd be too much like my father, quiet, hard, but I'd want them to have this, a place like this." She placed a hand over his. "Then let's make it a place worth handing down." On the first clear day of April, Yates rode into Elk Ridge. He returned 2 days later, saddle sagging with seed pouches, a spool of wire, and a folded sheet of paper with Willa's name written carefully across the front. She read the letter on the porch, her fingers trembling just slightly. When she finished, she folded it twice and tucked it into her apron. "She wants to visit," she said. "You want her here?" "I didn't think I did," she admitted. "But now I think maybe I do." He reached for her hand. "Then she's welcome." Spring moved in slow but certain. The snow vanished from the meadow and the soil warmed under their boots. They planted rows, marked paths with flat stones, built a small gate from salvaged rails Yates had hauled up from the old trail. When Willa's sister arrived in late May, the hills were green again, and the creek ran clean under the morning sun. She stayed a week. Long enough to see what Willa had built, to walk the rows of beans and early lettuce, to see Yates kneeling in the garden with soil on his hands, and her sister's name spoken gently from his lips. On her last night, she and Willa sat together near the fire, the air soft with pine smoke and the call of night birds drifting down from the trees. "He loves you," her sister said, not with surprise but certainty. "I know," Willa replied. "Does it feel safe now?" Willa looked toward the window, where Yates moved past with a lantern, checking the gate before bed. "It feels like it was always waiting for me to find it." That summer, the garden filled. Willa dried herbs in the rack they'd built, packed jars of pickled beans, and stitched a quilt from scraps of flannel and cotton. Yates fenced a second plot where they planted corn. They built a table long enough for more than two, just in case. In late August, Willa stood barefoot in the creek, the hem of her dress dark with water. Yates crossed from the woodpile, a strip of leather in his hand. "I carved something," he said, holding it out. It was the bird she'd started long ago, now smooth and finished, its wings outstretched. He'd shaped the tail, sharpened the beak, and added a small notch in the back where a string could pass through. She ran her thumb along its back. "You kept it. I wanted you to have it complete." She reached up, tying it to the cabin eave with the leather string. It turned gently in the breeze. Later, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and the day folded itself into quiet, Willa sat with Yates on the porch steps, her head resting against his shoulder. "I had nothing left once," she said. "Not even a name I could speak without shame." He kissed the top of her head. "You've got more than that now. I have a place, I have you. You'll never be without either again." And she never was. They grew old in the valley, seasons passing in slow, certain rhythm. The garden grew, the roof held, and the love between them deepened with every shared sunrise. Their life was not loud. It was not easy, but it was theirs honest and whole. And in that quiet stretch of Wyoming earth, Willa Carrigan and Yates Varnell lived out their days, not as ghosts of their pasts, but as the home they had built together, rooted, strong, and unshakably loved.